Alright guys, we're going to get going. Can you hear me okay? I would just like to quickly introduce Emily from Create 33, and she's going to tell you a little bit about this beautiful, beautiful venue that we're sitting next to.
Hi, thanks for being here. My name is Emily. I'm the Director of Vertical Development for Create 33. I just started, so about 6 weeks in. Very excited that we are building out our first vertical here as we speak, and it is fintech, which blockchain plays a critical role as a technology. So we're happy that you guys are here, and hopefully in the coming months we will have some additional programming in the vein of this topic. And just in general, Create 33 is essentially a founder's center for tech entrepreneurs. We have a number of backers, including Madrona, who is our host, and Amazon and Microsoft, in addition to a number of fintech-specific partners and service providers who are all here in the Pacific Northwest and interested in growing jobs through entrepreneurship. And that's why we're here. And we offer access and resources in the form of capital and networking, customer introductions and talent, programming, which you're participating in, and then space, this lovely space. So we have 13 currently resident companies that are always cycling through, and we seek to essentially help entrepreneurs get through their journey faster, easier, less painfully. Having been through my own, I can say it's valuable. So if any of you have a company that you're working on or are thinking about it, please do feel free to reach out to us about the possibility of membership. We do a number of things every month. There are great ways to sort of get a feel for what we do in the space. I'm happy to share more, and our website is just create33.co. And I'll leave it at that. But thank you for being here and enjoy the show.
Yeah, so I'm actually a member here at Create 33, which is, so I really love this space actually. We have offices in New York and Seattle and at my company, and this is like by far much nicer than our office in New York. So, and they're great, they give a lot of resources, big Create 33 fan. Okay, so welcome to the first meetup of its kind, where we have joined forces together, the Hyperledger and Ethereum Meetups, to talk about blockchain interoperability. So thank you so much, Marissa, for helping to bring this whole thing together. Marissa organizes the Hyperledger Meetup, and I organize the Ethereum Meetup along with Joshua over here. So really excited to talk about how our two communities and systems kind of can come together to think through how to drive enterprise adoption. So we have an awesome panel tonight. We have Scott Olson, who is a director at Trufflesuite. And Truffle is actually hosting a very cool conference the first weekend of August. I'm sure Scott would love to tell you more about that. I'll be there. We have Agha, who's the founder of Olypsis, a blockchain services company, and the co-founder of Blockchain Key, which is a blockchain key management system. We have Imran Peerbhai, who is, let me get your title correct, Imran, a principal research software developer at ThinkPredict, which is an advanced technology consulting company. And then we have Joshua Shane, who helps organize the Ethereum Meetup, but he's also the director of marketing at Uport, which is a self-sovereign identity system built on top of Ethereum. And then we have Marissa she works at Forum Solutions and is the organizer of the Hyperledger Meetup. So that is our panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Megan. So gentlemen, if I can ask you to scoot a little bit my way. I miss calculated chairs, and I want to make sure everybody gets. So we are recording the session for the Hyperledger YouTube channel, just so everybody is aware. But thank you guys all for being here today. I thought I would start with, if anyone in the audience had an example of a problem or a time where they've heard of blockchain interoperability and what that means to them. Anybody want to volunteer?
Don't be shy. We will call on you.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll start. I do want to add, I would hope that this is a very interactive session. So if you have questions along the way, feel free to raise your hand. Who listens to Laura Shin's podcast? Anybody? So I was listening to the one with Gabriel Abed from BIT, and he is talking about creating centralized digital currencies in the Caribbean. And he was talking about the process of basically going around to central banks in every community in the Caribbean and trying to get buy-in from leadership about creating a centralized digital currency. And their goal is to basically have a centralized digital currency for all of the Eastern Caribbean. And one of the questions was, well, so is every island or every central bank using the same blockchain platform? And he went on to talk for about 5 minutes about how important it is for each central bank to really identify the solution that is most important for them or that makes the most sense, whether that was Hyperledger or Bitcoin or something else. And then the follow-up question was like, well, how are you going to connect all those systems together? And the response was, well, we're working on that. So I think that was just kind of got me thinking of like, is it that easy? You just like work on it and then the interoperability happens? That would be pretty great, but I think there might be more work involved. Welcome, David.
Hi.
Everyone,
Sorry
this
I'm
is
late.
David Clark from Trufflesuite.
Hi, everyone.
Glad you can make it. There's water behind you if you need.
Excellent.
Yes.
Thanks.
Okay, so did that story trigger any examples from the audience? No? All right, so I will turn to the panelists and ask, what does blockchain interoperability, how do you define that and what does that mean to you? And whoever wants to start.
So I think you have some good comments on this already. Thanks for volunteering me. So I wrote all the answers down. I think this is a good topic, and to what you're saying, you can't put the cart before the horse. I think just expecting the interoperability will happen, and we just start building cool stuff. Everyone's going to go on their own direction, and before you know it, it's going to be a lot more difficult to kind of make this cohesive again. So, and I kind of talk on behalf of Truffle too, is kind of what we all kind of came up with, but it's the ability to create a seamless integration between centralized ledgers that have a clear and defined standardized process, allowing greater user experience. And that's not just for the end user, but also for the developers. We also recognize that, modern Web 2.0, you don't want, as a dev, to be limited to just having, let's say you're an iOS developer, you're just on iOS, you want to have access to all sorts of platforms. Better for you, better for the community, and so Interop allows, especially as a developer, to have more access to more of the community outside of just, for example, Ethereum, to have Hyperledger and so forth. So the integration is something that's got to be seamless and coming up with standardized kind of procedures. For us, it's the tooling side of it.
Oh yeah. So I'm gonna go. Is this on? Is everyone hearing?
You can turn it on. Oh,
Yeah.
you're
There we
loud.
go. I'm loud enough anyway.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question of what defines interop, right? If I take a transaction in Ethereum, right? I bought a dog, right? And I notarize that to Hyperledger. Is that interop? Even though I haven't had any chain-to-chain calls, I did that entirely through my own code. That could be one definition, right? Simple notarization could be a definition of interop. It could be some sort of direct chain sync. It could be programmatic interop. I write a smart contract in Solidity and I can deploy it in Ceph on Hyperledger. Is that interop, right?
Solidity is the language used in Ethereum.
It's most commonly used in Ethereum. There is one other, but I didn't bother to learn it. All right. So there are 3 ways you can do it. You can do application level interop, right? I'm notarizing. You can do automatic chain interop, or you could do language interop. So I think there are at least those 3. There might be a few others. Just defining interop to start the conversation.
So on that note, I think that what most people are trying to go for right now, the end goal is the one standardization. You look at projects like Cosmos or Polkadot. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to create the intermediary between all these different chains. That's the end goal. You have a token on one chain, you can transfer it to another chain. I think that we're not 100%, we're not there yet. We're just not. Where we are right now is interoperability. We're making strides towards interoperability in code. So you can go from Ethereum to Hyperledger in a little bit easier way right now.
There are processes too, right? There's a DevOps definition of interop where you do it in code and then you auto-port, right? You transaction by transaction. right? So that could be another way to do it.
From a marketing point of view, I think about it in terms of the user experience. And so there are, as you mentioned, there are several different levels of what does interoperability mean. So if it interoperates at a user experience level, I consider that, from my point of view, interoperable. So an example of that is, the standards built around self-sovereign identity, using decentralized identifiers as a standard used across different blockchains. So Hyperledger, Microsoft's Ion platform, Ethereum, they all share the decentralized identity standards that are established through W3C. And so the idea is that you want to be able, from a user perspective, to take a decentralized identifier that's part of a sovereign or a Hyperledger scheme and be able to use that on another platform, just have it resolved to the right place. So as long as you can, from a user point of view, use a decentralized identifier that was produced by a Hyperledger Aries platform and use it with Microsoft Sidetrees or with Uport, that to me is kind of the interoperable level that I think users care about. They want to have seamless interaction across different domains and across different ecosystems, and that I think is where the rubber meets the road in terms of how people will perceive making progress across different blockchains.
I mean, I would just follow up with what Joshua said, that
You can have your loud voice, yeah.
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, I would just follow up. I think interop really means it's really what the user experience is all about. Right now, we are, to use the metaphor of 4G or 5G or LGE or LTE or what have you. We are building out the iOS and the Android and the BlackBerry and the Windows Phone and all of those platforms right now, and trying to get those stable. And I think we're working toward everything working together, and that's really what the users are looking for.
Who's the BlackBerry and blockchain?
All right. So now I want to shift a little bit to kind of enterprise level applications. We know of a lot of industries that are starting to look at blockchain technologies and piloting, and wanting to hear your guys' perspective on what is the industry that's really primed to take the lead on engaging an open source platform like Hyperledger or Ethereum, instead of trying to build their own private chain solution, and curious about, from the enterprise level, how people are adopting those technologies.
If some of you went to Build, you saw the big announcement with Microsoft Starbucks doing their kind of I think it's bean to cup program. It's a good idea. I think what brings it into light is the transparency, the use case of a supply chain, and having the understanding of where things came from. I've seen this a lot. A lot of people ask about this too. It's just whether it's food or pharmaceutical, validating and knowing what you're getting is actually what you're getting is super important. If I want grass-fed meat, I want to make sure that cow was taken care of the right way, or I want my cage-free chickens, I want to make sure they're actually roaming around in the sun. They weren't just out for 2 minutes and then put back in, and then they call it cage-free. These are big deals for a lot of people, and so having that transparency is a great use case that blockchain can leverage. And I think even beyond that, I think there's a company called Fairchain, where they basically also expose just the nature of what used to be when you would do bidding on farms to get coffee beans and then get it roasted. And so at the time they were getting basically undermined and had to pay for a very low fee, so they couldn't barely pay wages. It's a terrible setup, and now that blockchain has exposed that, everything can get lifted back up into a more marketable business mindset where these businesses can actually make money, and they can pay their employees better wages and better quality of life. And so I think that's a good use case. Starbucks is one of those, is what we've seen too on an enterprise level. So that's just one of many. But
So Providence, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to poke a hole in this right now. Right. So
It begins.
Yeah. I'm sort of the most critical person of blockchain, I think, even though I'm in the space too, and I am a believer in some degree. But the Microsoft example is a great example of great marketing, but no real product, right? Microsoft is paying Starbucks to pretend to use a solution as a marketing expense. It's not
Blockchain
real.
washing.
yeah. Just like I ended with Walmart and that stuff, right? And that is not real. That will the probability of being deployed once the payments stop being made is near zero. So that is not, and I also don't think that the cloud providers, traditional cloud providers, IBM, Microsoft, Google, whatever, are actually well positioned for a decentralized world, right? I think that the best people positioned right now are probably the network infrastructure providers, the AT&Ts, the Sprints, the T-Mobiles, right, the Verizons, because they would love it if there's a node in here and over there and out at sea 3 miles, right? Because that's where they can extract the tracks on every transaction that way. So I think that if anyone's going to really benefit from this and adopt a chain, not develop their own chain like a Quorum with JP Morgan, it'll be telecom.
Thank you.
What do you guys think about DeFi? DeFi seems to be the killer app. Obviously, there's been a lot of traction in the lending space. There's companies like Bakkt. Bakkt is NASDAQ's answer. They're going to be integrating crypto payments. So I think there is a lot of movement on DeFi. What do you guys think? Any holes in that?
I think DeFi is an interesting thing that might come up, but right now, like we're seeing financial services just in general getting very interested in actually, like Uport is now part of the United Kingdom Financial Services Sandbox, which is where they build up pilots to be able to decide. And so we're working with a KYC provider on Fido. And on Fido, establishes KYC, but then they want to create verifiable credentials out of it, so you can reuse a credential over and over and over and over again.
KYC for the crowd.
KYC is know your customer. So when you sign up for a bank, or if you want to join some other organization, you have to go through this onboarding process, which in the States is actually much less time consuming than it is elsewhere. Like in Europe, it's literally a 60-step process, and even with a phone, it takes like an hour. So the goal is to reduce the transaction cost of those kinds of interactions and reduce the friction to getting people onboarded. And so having verifiable credentials in that context is something that's very valuable because it radically reduces those onboarding costs, it reduces the customer experience friction. And so there are a number of environments across different segments of the market that are looking at this, but financial services in particular is very, very interested. Especially they have, investors and other folks who don't want to go through the accredited investor process over and over again. So having verifiable credentials in that environment is very positive, and we're seeing a lot of traction in financial services, less so elsewhere, most likely because they have a lot of money and any kind of fractional benefit is magnified through scale. So they're willing to go through these experiments. But that's the kind of traction that we're seeing right now, and it's not particularly blockchain-y, other than the identities are anchored in the blockchain and they help with key management. But it's not a heavy-duty, kind of blockchain transaction use case.
Yeah, I would just add that a good exercise is look at industries that that blockchain can potentially disrupt, and the financial sector is obviously a good one. When you have peer-to-peer transactions that you can remove the intermediary, I think those are good places to start. Insurance, you can just go right through the list of where transacting and transferring anything of value, whether it's mortgage for the home or your identity or data doesn't just because it has a monetary value doesn't mean it's anything of value. So there are many industries that are ripe for it. I just noticed that, or I read that was that Equifax has to pay like almost $1 billion fine for their breach. That fine goes to the FTC. It doesn't go to all of the users whose data, basically every American that's in Equifax's system. So I think those are great use cases for blockchain to really come in and make things better. Anything to say about that, whole poker?
Yeah, whole. So why does centralization exist to begin with, right? I mean, there's sort of a philosophy problem here. Some things are better done through a central authority because you have direct enforcement, right? A blockchain-based land registry is pointless if the government doesn't say yes, right? And really because then who's going to evict the person who's squatting in my house, right? And so, so a lot of these things have those kinds of things. Centralization of access requests to credit history. Hey, has Imran paid his bills on time? Right? That exists because everyone wants to know who to call and they want to trust an answer. The data is enforced to some degree. In a blockchain world, in a decentralized world, you don't necessarily have, like, are you going to contact Imran? And Imran has allowed you to view his financial transactions, right, historically or not, right? And how many of them do I selectively choose, right? It becomes a poker game, and it becomes a worse problem in a decentralized solution than in a centralized solution. So I see the value in decentralized identity. I think that's probably one of the killer apps. But in decentralized credit reporting, that actually seems to be a bad app, right, in my mind. Even though it would be better for the consumer, it's worse for the business side that's actually paying the money. We don't pay Equifax, right? AT&T or Visa or whoever, they pay Equifax.
All right, so moving on, I think about this question quite a bit, but you know, I'm familiar with Hyperledger. You know, Ethereum is another open source effort. What are the benefits for an enterprise or a company selecting an open source platform to build their blockchain solution on versus building their own private solution or private chain?
Developers, first and foremost. There have been a lot of efforts to build these private closed source chains, and they're hell of a staff. I think that's one of the biggest ones.
There's also a distinction to be made between using an open source solution and using the mainnet.
Okay.
Right. So we are
Walk us
seeing,
through that.
well, so the mainnet, for those of you who don't know, is basically the big Ethereum or the blockchain that's out there that's public and permissionless. Anyone can go use it, anyone can access it, anyone can write to it, which, you know, if you're a business, makes you a little nervous, right? You don't want all of your transactions out in a public blockchain, even if it happens to be, you know, hashed. Like and in fact, there are legal requirements in places like the EU right now where you actually can't put personal information there. It's against the new GDPR law. So, so there are a lot of private instantiations of these open source projects, whether it's Hyperledger or Ethereum or any rootstock, down in South America. There are a lot of these open source solutions which are still open source, but nevertheless they're not on the public permissionless net. They're on either permissioned or private networks, but they're taking advantage of the open source ecosystem and depending on the license, helping build out the stack as part of it.
So they deploy that code, the same code that you would see on mainnet, but in a more controlled environment.
Yeah.
That's why we created Ganache.
Exactly.
Do you want to say what Ganache is? I don't.
Yeah, so it's like it
Besides
allows you to
frosting?
do what he was just explaining. All the you don't have to go to mainnet, and all of a sudden you get a bug, and it's costly. Right? We wanted to create that staging environment before you go to production to do as much as you can to get it. Basically replicates the Ethereum mainnet, so you get that same feel, transaction speeds, all that stuff. See what the data looks like before you deploy. So a lot of people use it, but I agree, it is, I think the dev experience is the first and foremost to be impacted. And then the holes that I'm seeing as far as the contribution side of the open source and people committing code, is there still some kind of, I don't know if you guys can answer this, but there is some kind of right and all, authority who would approve that code. I mean, not everyone can just contribute and whatnot. So there can still be some regulated centralization, which can be good, but I don't know, what do you guys think about some of that?
Do you mean specifically like in the Hyperledger or Fabric community, or the Fabric community or the Ethereum? Well, I think that's good. It's like it's not really like how do these open source projects come to consensus around what should be added to a commit? It's through the best people in the community commit consensus, right? So it's still decentralized enough versus having just one company sign off on that. I think there is value there.
I'm going to go back to the original question, right? I think that open source versus closed source is kind of a weird dichotomy because a a lot of things start as open source, and as they develop, they become more closed, right?
Hyperledger Network.
Yeah. But I think that's actually natural progression. Let's talk about Kafka, Apache Kafka, right? It's a message queuing system that people use in the world of DevOps. Amazon has their own private. It's completely unrelated. They took the Kafka wire protocol and they re-implemented it, and no one can see that source code because it's closed to them, right? I think Hyperledger or Ethereum or even Bitcoin, people will start there because developers are there and there's a starting point that's better than, what's a Merkle tree and how do I hash, right? But once you get past that initial boom, right, and you get that first thing and you get that first real use for yourself, the natural progression of a company who, companies are not, even a public company is essentially a secret entity, right, internally. Their natural progression will be towards closing off what is their bread and butter. They might open source bits and pieces on the side for interoperating with other people in the community, but in the end, the final part of the solution, there will be a closed source component.
I think there's a good precedent for who's done this right. This might be a little bit controversial, but I think Quorum got this right.
Yeah.
They forked off Ethereum, they got the best of the public community, it's easier for them to onboard developers. I'm sure they can use the great ecosystem and the great tools that are out there, but most of the real implementations are happening in the background. You can't see any of it.
Any thoughts from the audience?
Do a lot of you know Quorum?
It's JP Morgan essentially forked off Ethereum.
And fork means?
They made a copy of it and then slapped the name on it.
Let's just get real and white label.
It's white label.
Does anyone not
They
know?
copied all the good
Raise your
stuff.
hand if you don't know what a fork is.
Now
Don't
you're
you
just
eat
gonna
with
embarrass
them? They're like chopsticks, except they're...
So I actually have never heard it described as white labeling, though. So
That's great. That was good.
yeah. Thank you.
Copyright that.
Yeah. Okay. So I think from a business applications perspective, a lot of the conversations I have are around return on investment for implementing a new technology. I come from a healthcare background where patient care is very important, but cost is a very critical piece as well. So when are we actually going to have models that show a return on investment for implementing blockchain solutions at the enterprise level?
You're looking at me.
What are the tools?
There are some.
Yeah, it depends what you mean, like,
Yeah.
so is this ROI for all the money that the industry has plowed into blockchain, and that's
No,
gonna,
I
or
think
is
like
this
an
for a
individual
specific use
enterprise.
case?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there are a lot of use cases where the ROI is relatively clear. Again, I can speak from the identity side, like
Okay.
reusing verifiable credentials. We have a little spreadsheet that we give to our customers, and they look through it and they're like, oh yeah, this totally makes sense.
Okay.
So that's how we move forward. But again, that's kind of like the app level, user experience level ROI, rather than kind of digging down below. So I would leave it to these guys to talk more.
I would kind of go back to Quorum as a great example, and I don't want to steal their thunder because they will be speaking at TruffleCon. By the way, next weekend, here to plug our event, TruffleCon will have several of these companies presenting. But I think Quorum has been able, in the financial sector and banking in particular, the ability to increase settlement times, transactions, interbanking on, with their partners is something that they have certainly been able to see a pretty quick ROI.
So, I want to hedge a little bit here, right? ROIs, like real measurable ROIs, probably not at least for 2 years, right? Just because a lot of the state of the technology just isn't there for that kind of thing. Good ideas that might work, banking, clearing, letters of credit, financial things, SIM swaps, those kinds of things. I think that those will be the first ones that may show an ROI identity, right? But until one of them actually does with something that can be verify it externally, which currently nothing I think is other than buying Bitcoin at $2, right? That is yeah, that's got great ROI. That's the best ROI, right? But quantitative measurements, I don't think will be there for a few years.
I think what to add to that is, like Deloitte did a study, and it's like 33%. So of companies that were all about blockchain that just jumped right into it now are unclear what the vision of the ROI is, and now we're kind of in this like weird limbo funk phase now where you start to see people take a step back, and it's almost like I heard the term they've been abused in some sense with the ideology behind what they thought blockchain was going to give them, i.e. ROI instantaneously. It didn't happen. So they reallocate their funds back to cloud development or something like that, or keep it, so.
Cloud development.
Yeah.
So trough of disillusionment has hit
Yeah.
enterprise, yeah.
Depression of disillusionment.
Yeah. All right. So shifting topic a bit, one of the reasons that the Ethereum Meetup and the Hyperledger Meetup combined forces, one is because I love these people, but also because in October last year, Ethereum and Hyperledger announced a partnership and supporting each other both in development and in the tools and protocols that they're building. And then we've also seen a Truffle announcement recently with partnership with Microsoft. And so I'm curious about, maybe Ali, this goes back to your point about how open source projects help developers engage. I'm curious about how you guys have seen consortium or partnerships help move the technology forward.
So one of the big problems in the blockchain space is creating critical mass and network effects. How do you get enough people involved in using these tools in a way that adding another person makes the network more valuable, and so you have more incentive to join the network and participate. And so consortia are really key here. You need an ecosystem that can essentially bootstrap that cold start. If you just, if I have my little app that has my identity on it, but I have nowhere to show it and share it, no one cares, right? So consortia is a way to provide kind of a top-down edict that says, we are engaging in this new ecosystem. This is the kind of solution that you're going to use. Everyone in this ecosystem use it. In the same way that we encourage everyone to use a phone app on their phone, because that's how you get to use your phone. It's a similar kind of thing where you say, this is just the way that you do things in this ecosystem. There are lots of them that are developing. There is LACchain, which is the Latin American group that is driven by the Inter-American Development Bank. And there are lots of activities going on within each of the countries in Latin America focused on creating these environments where all of their users within that country will adopt this standard. And so it's really these consortia that are driving these kinds of standards in a way that bootstraps this whole problem of how do you get enough people using them to actually make it valuable. That is the vision. There are bajillions of these in process. We need to see where they get to.
I'm going to be totally a jerk here and say consortiums are actually a problem in themselves. They should not exist, right? So let's look at why do people care about Interop, right? Let's go back in time to the format wars, the DVD format wars, Blu-ray versus HDVD, right? Why did people?
What's an HDTV?
HDVD, right? You know what a Blu-ray is, right?
Someone lost.
Yeah. So you had these things that you could put in and watch movies on, right? And they came in two different formats.
Is this like VHS and beta?
Yeah. Okay. All right. And so we've seen this movie a million times, right? VHS and beta, HD, DVD, Blu-ray, right? There is eventually only one winner. There is no interop, right? And interop is just a slowdown. It's a sign that we don't know who the winner is going to be, so we want to hedge our bets and spread it as an end user, right? I care about interop in blockchain because I don't know if it's going to be Ethereum or if it's going to be Hyperledger. Therefore, I want my code to still work in the future.
Can
I
yeah,
I want to disagree with that.
So in the long term, you might be right. Okay, I want to piggyback off these to your answer, off these answers, and answer your question with a question. Why is Hyperledger a thing?
Because I get paid for it.
Exactly. That's why
That was the
Hyperledger is a
answer.
thing. Hyperledger is a thing because you had a company that went out there and was business focused and got involved with all the consortiums and created all the consortiums and started pushing their solution.
To sell cloud instances.
True, perhaps that was their
Same for
business
Microsoft.
purpose.
Yeah.
But so
Yeah.
to say that the consortiums don't have value, I don't think that's necessarily true. That is the way you compete. That's the way you get involved companies. Ethereum got behind on that. Now it's catching back up. I think there's a lot of value with consortiums. And I think a lot of industries in the future will be creating their blockchain solutions around these consortiums. How else are you going to get all these, how are you going to get the transport industry to come to the same table? How are you going to get the poultry companies to come to the same table? They're going to have to join a consortium. They're going to have to get to a bylaws, standardization, and then go from there.
Okay, Bitcoin is not a consortium. They're the biggest winner, right? And lost. Bitcoin is not a consortium. If we're going to use this entire thing.
That would be like
It's
MySpace.
totally different. It's totally different.
MySpace was the sole winner in social.
Yeah.
in-
You can replace the winner, right? There's no question that Android came along and maybe has more market share now than Apple. But there was no question Apple designed that user interface, and everyone else has kind of copied their work at the end, right?
So that brings me back to why I disagree with your original example, because it is true that there was one winner, but that winner then was the standard through which everyone else in the ecosystem built, right? So once a winner shook out, there was still a whole group of industry players who joined in and started building on that standard.
Sure.
To ensure that they could grow the ecosystem, and we see, and part of that, I think the issue is how we describe consortia. Like a consortia is a group of companies getting together to achieve a common goal and share resources. Like that's a value chain as well, right? So it depends how you are how you're defining that around consortia. Is there a winner-take-all power law that's probably going to happen? Yes, probably. But that doesn't mean that consortia are not useful. I think those are orthogonal issues.
Right, in terms of platform, there'll be a winner-take-all probably, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we started seeing it well in advance, is why we made these announcements to become more chain agnostic, for that very reason, to broaden ourselves out so we know, yeah, there probably will be a winner down the road, we just don't know who it is yet.
Yeah.
So let's take care of business now.
That's why consortia exist, though, in my mind, right? They exist because we don't know who the winner is, right? If we knew the winner, then it's a standard. It's Microsoft Office's document standard. LibreOffice copies it. It's the window. It's the Apple swipe gesture. Android copies it. It becomes interop by standardization, right, rather than by consortia.
Wait, you got something to say? Say it.
I said, or 800-pound gorilla.
Right.
Yes.
Right. The standards are created de facto by the winner. But even with standards, you still want to have a bunch of companies get together to achieve common goals around those standards.
Sure.
Yeah.
So interop to me means a lot. There's a company a long time ago, still exists, they do trade shows, it's called Interop. My dad started that. I helped to wire up different boxes in Muscogee Center
Okay.
to show that TCP/IP was better than OSC.
I do not know what that
that's
Networking protocols.
it's,
Use it every day.
it's internet standard protocols, and OSC had flaws in how many addresses they could ultimately generate. We wouldn't have an Internet of Things possibility unless somebody forked off an OSC. But TCP/IP won on that, and what consortiums formed on that.
Right.
In
They formed
the
after.
formation of the standardization, really what you saw is groups and more groups crowdsourcing a solution, trying to find that average answer that nobody knows the specific answer.
Sure.
But as a group, we come to that answer. And so that's where the consortiums, I think, have their greatest value.
That's the efficient market hypothesis, just restated
Yeah.
technically, right? And I don't believe in the efficient market hypothesis to begin with. I'm an economist by
Okay.
training, and so once you throw that out, you throw out the idea of a lot of these things working, right?
Mhm.
If you, I don't think markets are efficient, I think that they're self-predicting, right? They create the condition that they predict will happen.
Mhm.
And TCP/IP is a great example, right? There was a lot of funded research on this from and AT&T got a big line share of that thing, and this really was a Bell Labs single source kind of thing, right? And the other alternatives existed, right? OSC was one, IBM had their token ring kind of thing, right? And all those things fell apart. We now all speak TCP/IP. No one here speaks token ring. I don't mean like yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay. questions or points on that?
I guess to just finish out, I mean, what I see there is that what we're merging into is what is the standardization where we can have authentication as a standardization mean or protocol, and we can have different sorts of tokens for merit money or different tokens for cash transactions or tokenization of assets, but building up that interoperability between the hash codes so you can swap onto pretty much any backbone pretty quickly is what I, as an end user, company developer type person, need.
I'm not saying that consortiums are bad for the end user.
Okay.
Right. There's a lot of value in consortiums and open source and these kinds of things. I'm totally for those things as an end user. The problem statement I'm saying is that they actually slow adoption, right? When you can't decide between token ring and Ethernet, you're going to make a card that does both, right? When you can't decide between Ethereum and Hyperledger, you're going to make some sort of language or a tool path that does both, right? These are problems now because they're trying to grow people, right? That's what I'm saying.
I think it's still early.
Yeah.
I think that in like 3 years we'll all be using Ethereum.
Oh, that's a great segue in terms of if you build it, they will come. Truffle was actually born inside Consensus before Ethereum even launched mainnet. So I mean, we've been around. We like to say before the smart contract. We like to say 9 out of 9 Ethereum developers use Truffle. So we've very recently we've surpassed 3 million downloads of our tools. And we are, again, not to steal thunder from TruffleCon, but we will be making announcements with other enterprise chains at TruffleCon about this very subject, about making the experience the same across ecosystems. And so I think that's going to, I mean, again, no one disagrees. We're in the very early days here. But I think getting a common experience, at least, to your point, for developers is going to go a long way.
Oh no, it came and went.
Okay. Clive, did you want?
Yeah. So I'd like to actually just toss out a couple of different posits here, a different approach that's maybe going on. So if you peel open Hyperledger, what's going on now is there's actually some movement towards interoperability between the different products, and that's more at a kind of an intermediate level, more around a framework level. For example, Hyperledger Grid, which has got Cargill, Intel, Target, Intel again, a lot of interest in Intel. But when you actually say, okay, well, how's the interop going to happen? If the frameworks are going to be sort of the industry consulting behind transportation and retail and other areas, then probably the app developers are going to actually knit these together in a Web 3 rather than a Web 2 model. So if you actually, even while we're speaking, I'm not sure it may have finished, but TC39 is meeting over at Redmond, and Compass flew in from Indonesia to look at the safe extreme modules in JavaScript. So if those safe extreme modules are plugged into something like Truffle, then what could happen is if we can secure the environment as we do on something like iOS and Android, we can do the interop there between the platforms, and then the information is going to flow between the different platforms, whether it's Ethereum, Hyperledger, or whatever it is.
Intel's been pushing SGX in some form or another for a really long time, right? I mean, Hyperledger sought to exist because Intel wanted to push POET and SGX, right? Because they believed that a secure execution environment, totally IP protected to only Intel chips, that every cloud provider is now forced to buy, will be a great business benefit to Intel. So I can totally see why secure execution environments, secure code paths and things like that are really valuable to Intel. That's why they push this.
But you can also get secure execution paths actually by using extremely secure JavaScript. It's kind of a little bit of an oxymoron, but
yeah.
But over the last 10 years, 4.5, nearly 5 major changes have happened to the language. And if we get a secure language, as we do with as the JavaScript nearly is, and as Rust is.
Yeah, once you're in memory, you're hackable. The only way to be really secure with any algorithm is to be out of memory. You have to be in a TE of some sort. Secure SGX from Intel, ARM's got their own, right? But you have to be outside of the world that you and I can actually see into. And then you have this private SDK, pay for access, it gets really hairy and complicated. So Hyperledger is probably the best of the worst worlds when you get into that environment.
So why don't we take a few minutes, you guys have already kind of gotten into what the future looks like a bit, but curious to hear, I guess you all seem pretty confident that we're heading to a one-chain world, but would like to understand why and what you're seeing today that is an indicator, so aside from history repeating itself, I guess.
I think the aggregation game wins, and we are going to end up with one primary winner, but we're going to have a long tail as well. Earlier the comments about Cosmos and Polkadot, and they had their thesis is that you want different chains for different kinds of interactions. And so it may be that we end up standardizing around something like Cosmos or something like Polkadot that allows to sync different chains that have different needs. And obviously, we see this in all sorts of contexts. We have Bitcoin, we have Bitcoin Cash, we have Litecoin. All of these chains that have been forked off over time or developed to specifically meet different kinds of use cases. And so I think that the standardization might be focused around something like Polkadot or Cosmos or some future version of that, where you can sync across chains and be able to transfer tokens and the like. Because that long tail is still going to exist. There are always going to be specialized environments where you want different kinds of chains for different kinds of things.
Can someone explain Polkadot or Cosmos?
Yeah.
Megan!
Oh, Megan, come up here. Come on, come up.
Okay, so I personally, right? Okay, so I'm really interested in protocol level interoperability. I've been doing a lot of research on Polkadot, and essentially, and correct me if I'm wrong about the infrastructure, but you have all these blockchains running as parachains, and there are connector chains that sync to the one main chain. But for me, things like Polkadot and things like Cosmos to some extent, and I'd be interested to get your views, compromise, potentially very seriously, actual security, because they make assumptions about the finality of the different chains that they're running as parachains, right? And when you think about Ethereum, for example, right, going through an ETH 2.0 implementation, the current chain is going to be, potentially dead, supposedly. I think it has a lot of, if things like Polkadot and Cosmos become a thing, it has serious security implications. So I'm wondering if anybody has thoughts on
I think, especially with how many consensus mechanisms we have, protocols out there right now. I mean, that's something that needs to be a little bit more standardized and fine-tuned, but we just don't. There's so many good proof of fill in blank out there that we got to keep working on it. But there's definitely security flaws. I mean, you can create. I've heard people say create a decentralized API or some kind of blockchain DNS where the messaging can just go across from these parachains, but there is some exposure to that.
So a weak point that once you have interchain straight rights kind of deal, right, in this kind of model, is now you're only secure as your weakest chain. Yeah. So let's say you've got WebM, right? What is that? EOS, WebM chain, right? That's probably the dumbest execution environment you could imagine. Full Turing complete execution environment. There's so many freaking ways you could hack WebM. And if you're going to tell me that I find a way to do a transfer in WebM, and you happen to have some contract in Ether, and I can interop that, which means I can port it to a WebM client that can speak that protocol and can speak that change, make the change. Oh my God, right? So the interop is not always a good thing technically, right? You can create there's a metallurgy. You have a chain, a real chain, right? The longer the chain gets, the weaker it gets because the probability of a single weak link increases. Right? The more chains you interop with, the weaker your entire solution gets because the probability of one single bug being exploitable in the weakest point increases, right? Right. So going back to your initial question of why do we think that why does history repeat itself? Why is there a power law with a long tail? It's not a technical problem. It's a human thing, right? That's right. Right? We get a religion. We love our iPhones. We love this swipe gesture. Oh gosh, it's too expensive. Let's get it cheaper. Okay, right? That's really what happens. And then some people say, I hate this swipe gesture. But really humans have sort of a preference building thing where they talk to each other. Hey, I like the color blue. Do you know pink and blue? pink for girls, blue for boys now, right? It wasn't that way. Pink was for boys. It was the manly color 100 years ago. Why did it change? Because some marketer said so, and they managed to convince enough people to do that, right?
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I also don't think that we're looking into a future of extensive interoperability. I think we will converge to that one chain because of the human factor, because the developers, because the tools, because the easy use. And here's a key indicator. I think a chain that does not have a public network component to it will probably not be the winner. That's my assumption. Would you guys have an opinion on that? I know you do.
Say that again, sorry?
A chain that does not have a public network will not be the winner. You need to have some kind of public network component because not everyone's going to want to defer to AWS for their trust mechanism, for their distribution. There needs to be a decentralized network that can create that lattice of trust. Do you guys have an opinion on that?
I want to say the private, I actually think that the type of chain that doesn't exist right now, public-private chain kind of deal, where you have a public view but a private certificate-based right. Basically, if you
do that right now.
Yeah, if you took Hyperledger and do it on the fabric, right? I've been paid for it. But here's my overall opinion, right? If you're a company and you're interoperating with another company, you're AT&T and T-Mobile, right? You guys are going to want a private, completely not visible to the public chain for whatever you guys are arguing about yourselves over. Hey, he's my customer. No, she's my customer, right? So I think there will be a public winner, definitely. It might be Ethereum, it might be something else, right? And I think there will also be a framework that will be used by people building private chains for their specific consortia, JVs, whatever.
So do you think that possibility could come out of public Ethereum, private Ethereum, and if you wanted public ability, you would anchor your private Ethereum into the public? Is that possible, you think?
Oh, I mean, and there's a forum, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
We've already done it. It's done.
Yeah.
In theory.
JP Morgan.
The quorum Meetup now. I really think you guys did a really good job. The human element is going to be the biggest reason why we come together. And I think a great practical way of seeing that play out, because technically speaking, we can do this. It's just engaging with each other and going to these conferences, and not just like TruffleCon, like DevCon and Ethereum. And I've been to all these, and everybody, at least right now, still have that mindset of communicating peer-to-peer, and it's not salesy. It doesn't feel like, come join me and ripping on somebody else across the hall in their booth. It's definitely very collaborative, and if we can keep doing that, then I think we can scale the right way. But it is the human factor too on the other end, and we are selfish people, so I think there's a natural tendency to want to hang on to my chain and try to make that win and not talk to that other chain.
Alrighty, well, those are all my questions. Do you guys have questions for each other? Or does the audience have any questions?
Yeah, that'd be more fun.
Yeah. I'll give it a few times. No questions? Come on.
They just need beer.
Yeah.
Beer.
Sorry, I forgot the name, but the one in the Olypsis t-shirt, yeah. You mentioned that the winner would have to have an element of a public blockchain or a public sort of network. And then you mentioned something about AWS. That kind of went over my head. Could you explain that?
Sure. Like Imran has articulated, private chains rely on cloud providers for their distribution, for their trust mechanism. So if you're using Hyperledger, you're relying on most likely IBM's Bluemix network to act as your nodes in the network. You're artificially creating that distributed trust, because that distributed trust is enough of a threshold trust where AT&T is fine with it. AT&T doesn't care about 100% finality. They just care about, yeah, we trust AWS. They're unlikely to screw us, and if they do, we'll sue them for $1 million. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that is.
Any other questions?
Since one of the bases was interoperability for the path enterprise, I don't think we got to that last part there, at least that I really understood. So how far is it necessary for the path to enterprise? And so, besides this conversation of a winner, wouldn't that be a necessity in terms of internal distributed databases of some kind and then external ones? Or what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I was actually going to just refer back to agree what you were saying earlier. I mean, we're at a point now where we are looking for the winner, right? Or we're trying to find kind of the right fit. And in the short term, that means that a rising tide lifts all boats. So if we are in a position where all of us are trying to interoperate and play together, then we can win on the merits of the value of the service. And so in the midterm, we're going to end up trying to interoperate because we want to basically lift up the use in general of blockchains, make it clear that there is ROI, all of that. Over time, the market will shake out. But in the short and midterm, there's a lot of value to interoperation to capture an enterprise solution and actually have kind of repeatable, scalable solutions within the enterprise.
If you're going to have an enterprise adoption for real of a blockchain technology, right? We're not just talking about a POC done, for a marketing kind of deal. It's going to be specific to that enterprise and its partners and the other gorillas in the room. So let's call them gorillas because it's easier for me to think of it that way, right? So
consortium members?
Okay. So you've got the gorilla and you've got 20 monkeys. right? So, I mean, it really is the gorilla, the 2 or 3 gorillas who are fighting amongst themselves. Maybe one of the gorillas is named Uncle Sam, right? Maybe the other one of those gorillas is named Equifax. It doesn't really matter, right? And they don't trust each other for some reason, right? And so they've decided to do a blockchain-based solution on something. Hey, Equifax, we don't trust you to manage privacy, so every particular person you have, you certify every transaction comes in that was validly requested. And you put that on a chain so we can audit you, okay? I'm totally making this up. This is a terrible idea. So, right? But I mean, so that's how it'll come into being to begin with, is that you have these 2 big girls playing, and they'll agree to the terms of their game, right? Or 3 or 4 big gorillas. They'll say, we're going to do this all on Hyperledger sockets, right? And then they're going to say, okay, and now anyone who wants in on this, you have to interop with this, you have to standardize with our implementation. And then there's going to be a person who's an Ethereum developer who's going to say, hey, I want to play with you, but I don't want to learn your implementation. I just want to use Solidity. So that's how interop will happen organically, right? Interop happens on accident organically because of the way people play together, or monkeys in this case, and gorillas. Does that a good answer, by the way? Did I answer your question, or did I just go crazy?
Yeah, you got it.
Okay, thanks.
Is that the entirety of the role that you see regulatory playing in this?
Regulatory is huge for blockchain, right? I mean, it's one of the driving forces of why blockchain should exist in some cases. Sir?
I think you answered this question, but I don't think you quite grasp what's going on with the changes in language design.
Okay.
If we think back to probably where Satoshi Nakamoto came from, perhaps wasn't a economist, perhaps he was a member of a security team, and perhaps he saw the insecurity in the modern computing system and felt that he needed to work together with colleagues to create some sort of incentive scheme to improve computer security. And to make sure that that took off, they created some sort of a scheme with some sort of incentive behind it for developers. And out of that came blockchain. And then the next step would be, how do we improve languages sufficiently to do what you said we couldn't do earlier, which is to secure compute when it's not behind a big firewall.
So personally, I have a lot of personal opinions on this entire etiology, is that the right word, right? I think he was a poker player who got pissed that he couldn't play poker legally because the very first commits in Bitcoin are poker client stuff. There's actually code that says, hey, if you've got this hand kind of stuff, right? So that's what I think is the driving force of Bitcoin specifically, is you want to play poker and get away with it. That's a different story though, but I can back that up to some degree, right? Let's take a look at old chains. Like Merkle trees are not new, right? The Merkle proofs were done in what, 84, 85, right? First good use of Merkle trees were the New York Times and Surety, right? Where they did timestamps and tracking of the articles that were written. What is Git? An ever-growing Merkle tree. By definition, it's also distributed between my instance, where I am as a developer, and the main server. It's a blockchain. right? So there have been multiple uses of these blockchain kind of things. And so far, I mean, those seem to be good uses, right? It does seem to be that is the etiology. It arose from these, there was a specific thing that happened, a Merkle proof. There were 2 great use cases, and a third one, I think, in identity coming up, right? And I don't think they have anything to do with how you secure in memory your access to your data, right? So they're orthogonal in my mind.
Well,
But that's okay, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Opinions.
Yeah. But I think one of the, in order to bring them together, I think you would have to have secure programming languages, which are completely different than, say, C++ or even some of the attempts have been in C#. You'd have to actually have a capabilities-based programming language, which is probably used quite some time ago. In fact, there's even an example of it in the University of Washington. There's a Classy, I think it's a 250. It's completely secure. That still is used for some nuclear-powered stuff.
Mm-hmm. That's why it's security by security. I mean, if you're Turing complete and you have DMA, you can get access, right? And
DMA?
direct memory access, right? In any way, right? If I can put a chip on the bus and see the transfers, great, you're not secure anymore, right? So I think that a secure environment like you're talking about really is a total hardware solution where even DMA can't access what's going on. And so I just don't believe that. So that's my personal opinion. Now, I've done security work. I've designed and worked on security projects, including behavior detections and things like that. So I have a really decent background in this stuff, right? And it is plausible, but I personally don't believe it.
Any other questions? Megan?
So curious to hear from the Truffle guys, just because you guys work with both developers and with larger companies. Do you see the onus for creating interoperability falling more on the developer side of the house or more on the sort of like, business side? Like who is really caring about interoperability?
Good question.
Great
question. Really good question. Personally, I think that right now it's a sense of let's build it.
I have that sense too. Like I'm building an application where you're starting with Ethereum, but I'm thinking like, well, we need to look at all these other chains to like increase our client base.
Exactly.
I think about that. So to me, it's like it's on the application developers, but I don't know if that's like a.
You're afraid you're betting on the wrong horse.
So from our experience, just briefly from our experience when we work with consortia like Alastria and Blockchain, each of the different organizations within those consortia have different needs. So some of them are using Hyperledger, some of them are using Quorum, so the interop is being driven from the business case. Like if we were going to use this across a number of different industries and businesses, then we need to have interop, otherwise it's a non-starter.
Yeah, I was going to say too with Truffle, I see a lot on the dev side too as well. The dev experience. I mean, you're going to get them to buy into this. You got to build as much as you can and put it under the hood, so that way they can focus on actually envisioning building out the application. And so I think that at the end of the day, with the right tooling, as it's being agnostic, it gives it a chance for devs to have a vision on knowing where to go and not feeling like they're limited to just one chain or whatnot, like to your point, because it can get scary. You don't want to make the wrong decision, so to speak. And so the more of an end-to-end solution that we can create, like we just put out a kind of a DevOps solution in beta now, we just want to get as much as we can for the developer to do everything, so that way you can focus on the fun stuff.
Good question?
Yeah, just to be clear, you guys all think that some chain is going to subsume them all, or would it not be more appropriate to say that interoperability is going to win? So the Cosmos,
Libra.
It's never won. It's never won.
Yeah.
We're all talking with words, right?
Everywhere. But TCP/IP is everywhere.
It was the winner
It connects everywhere.
out of token or other things, right?
So what I'm saying is Polkadot or Cosmos or one of these are going to win, not some chain.
The reason I don't believe that is because the only way that could be possible is if different use cases facilitated the need to build on different chains. And I don't think that's how things actually happen in the real world. even if one chain is more difficult to build on or is not great for every use case, there will be some driving factor. It will be the tooling, it will be the developer community, it will be the social human aspect that will just drive everything to that. Just because one chain might win, but that chain might not be the best chain. And I think we should all think about that.
You don't think there's going to just be many, many, many chains. And then the interoperability in the same way TCP/IP is the interoperability currently for all such things is going to allow these things to talk to each other. Yeah. I mean, it seems like you're focusing on the nodes and not the connectivity.
I mean, OSI model, right? TCP/IP is an abstraction on top of the physical model, right? And there are other abstractions. There was IPX, right, and things like that. They didn't win, and TCP/IP won not because of a consortium, but because once they started to get ahead, more people decided to put support in their drivers. NE2000 is really what made TCP/IP win, right? Going to TCP/IP, I don't know why we're stuck on networks, right? But going back to this, no business or no group of businesses are going to have exactly the same needs, right? Some people are going to want, let's say they want a mine chain because their need is specifically for that level of trust.
Their chain is going to want to do whatever. This chain is going to want to do whatever. Right. And the key to it is, can we talk to each other in the ways we need to? That's what interoperability is.
Sure. Interoperability is 3 levels, right? The first level is I'm an application developer. I'm in that world, right? Pretend, right? Okay. In this pretend world where we have exactly 2 chains who have 1, right? And for whatever need. So I write a little library and I notarize to both. And that becomes interoperability if the 2 chains have very different designs, right? If there's an official need for the 2 chains to interrupt with each other through some official maintained mechanism, who's paying and maintaining that, right? If it's Ethereum and Hyperledger, who's paying for Hyperledger transactions to go into Ethereum? Because each one of those is a cost, right? So just because of the ways the world is structured and the who's and the responsibilities and who's going to own the secret and that kind of thing, I think that interop in the way that you're thinking about full interop tooling won't happen. I think interop and maybe there'll be a shim layer to run the smart contract from one language, from one chain to another, or one language to another will exist, or a developer double notarizing or something like that will happen. But I don't think that there'll be a full interop like there's a giant consortium thing and you follow this standard and use this library and you pay this fee. I really don't see that emerging.
But you see a single chain or 1 or 2 chains coalescing.
That was just an example. I don't know. It'll be a power law. There might be 200 chains, but the user count will power law.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Think about. I'm so sorry to keep laboring the point, but think about the developer community and the tools that have been built around Ethereum and how painful that process has been. If you've been an Ethereum developer for a couple of years, we're living in a completely different world now than from when the original release was, right? Thank God, right? And we're going to have to go through that same process with what, 10 chains, 20 chains, 100 chains? I think that's less likely. I think it's most likely like 1, maybe 2.
Let's do a quick survey, can
I? We have one question, but
Okay.
will it be
Because it's the top of the point.
related? Yeah.
Who here, Hello World level programming, right? And this is a developer kind of survey, has written a Hello World Ethereum smart contract on a private network. Just raise your hand real fast. Okay? Who's done it on any form of Hyperledger? I don't care which flavor. Notice that the hands did not overlap. Right? It's the human factor, and because the hands don't overlap, there's no driver for interop. And if I added another chain, say Dragon. Who here has done that on Dragon? Raise hands. Right? There's the power law. This is a human cause thing, not a technical thing. There's no technical reason for there not to be interop. I just don't think the social factors are there.
It was beautiful.
That was good.
It was beautiful.
Wait, we're here trying to change that, right? Like the whole point of like the Ethereum and Hyperledger get together is that at the beginning of these kinds of industries, you have a lot of competitors who are competing directly against each other. Blockchain is a unique environment because as one group, as one entity within that larger group succeeds, everyone gets to take advantage of that success as well as proof of concept or ROI, whatever. But as these industries mature, there is going to be a shakeout. There are going to be interoperability issues. And so we are kind of at the, we call this the Ethereum 2.0 meetup because we're moving beyond this we're going to win, we're going to be the best, to, okay, let's be more realistic about what the future looks like, and let's make sure that we are talking to each other and trying to find what users need, what enterprises need, and then work together to find out what that solution is. Because eventually, there will be a lot of shakeout, but we all still want to be here participating in this industry and moving things forward. So, you know, it is true that there is this kind of human disposition towards winner-take-all and power law, which is great, true, but we also want to try to collaborate and cooperate along the way, which is why we're here.
It's a great insurance policy right now. At some point, the insurance will be needed.
There's a question in the back.
Yeah, are any of these chains ready to win in terms of speed and throughput if there is this kind of convergence? What's going to need to happen to make that happen?
We were having this fight earlier.
Yeah, we were having this argument earlier. To answer your question, no, definitely not.
I was a bit late, so if I can give you the...
We were fighting privately.
Yeah, we were fighting privately, exactly. No, this is a really interesting theory. I want to know what everyone on the panel thinks about this. Imran, do you want to give your thesis?
I don't remember my thesis anymore.
Okay, so Imran, your thesis is
scalability.
Scalability.
Yes. Okay. It was a long fight. Actually, it wasn't that long. But
it wasn't a fight. It was a friendly conversation.
Yeah. I'm just teasing here. We're being mildly funny. This is the only kind of funny I can be. So anyway, so let's go talk about this. So the conversation we had is if you do an enterprise deployment, right? We're talking enterprise context here. I don't mean anything. Has a chain won in a non-enterprise environment in cryptocurrency? Heck yeah. Right? There's no question that the Bitcoin chain has won in cryptocurrency. There are certainly other chains. Our chain, great, they exist. But they're not even...
Actually, I don't think they exist.
Oh, man, that
was the curve.
Right? Sorry. I wasn't trying to be done. Sorry. All right, let's change that. But if we're talking in an enterprise context, enterprises don't care about mining. They care about things like transaction speed. They care about who else can see my records. They care about how difficult, like, who knows how they build not this kind of consortium. When an enterprise wants to play the guerrilla game with another enterprise, oh gosh, they have to do something like make a joint venture because they don't know who's going to pay for the servers, right? And I mean that literally, right? Because if you're I can't think of names. You're give me monkey names. Banana Corp and yeah.
Optum, they have a consortium.
Optum Healthcare. You monkey that.
Oh gosh, gorilla. Right, huge gorilla. All right. But the point remains is the first core problem an enterprise faces is who's going to pay for what. Right? And so usually it becomes you can't bring your guys because they might do something the wrong way because we don't trust them. So we'll have to hire new guys, right? Who's going to pay these new guys and gals, right? I'm using this gender neutral, right? To go write the code and stand up the servers and stuff like that. And the only way that they've really come to that answer is JVs. We'll make a joint venture. We'll make a new company, a holding company specifically for this project, right? That's problem one. And that's a terrible answer.
That's not the good problem, okay?
Yeah.
We didn't thought about that problem. We thought about the second problem, throughput.
Well, the second problem is actually visibility. The throughput's a third
Oh no, where does
See where we're talking now.
Exactly. You said to me that there was a fundamental throughput issue. Yeah. There's a physical limitation of how high throughput can get, and that will dictate the future of the industry in some sense.
Yeah. And going to that, right? That is totally true, right? Who here has built a chain from scratch, just done the Merkle tree, right? And just said, I'm going to pick a bunch of lines and just say, the cat ran backwards, the cat ran forwards, I'm going to build a Merkle tree out of that. One per line, right? Just proof of concept kind of stuff, and then just profile that, right? It's terrible. Once you hash anything, the speed of your transaction just goes through the floor, right? And even if you were to use, we argued over, application-specific integrated circuits being used for this hashing. Even if you did that, then you still have to pay the network cost of getting to wherever you've hosted your servers, right? So there will always be a relatively high transaction per second limitation. And then when you left, I did the math of where we are now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so right now, Hyperledger, right now, in the best case scenario, unverified, unmined, no poet enabled, right, or anything else crazy like that, and you're talking a data payload size of maybe, let's say, 5 good lines of text.
Yeah, so not just headers, not just the hash.
Yep. Yeah, well, because a lot of the stuff is defined as, oh yeah, we support 2,000 transactions per second. They mean hash copies.
Yeah, hash. Yeah.
Right.
So is it possible then that the winner things that are there now, because one that solves these problems, there would be a convergence.
Yes.
Yes and no, because remember, you don't need to be the best to win. You just need to be the most widely used and the most widely adopted. So, you know, maybe we have a breakthrough in sharding. Did you, what do you do?
Oh, gosh.
I will go there with you.
If anyone wants to talk about sharding, please see these two gentlemen.
It's hard enough with databases.
Okay, I think we have time for one last question if anyone has. Yeah.
Yeah, just like really quick, you mentioned Dragon Chain, and I went to a roundtable today, and conceptually, I couldn't really understand what exactly they do. What are your thoughts about that?
It's enterprise-focused blockchain.
They're a hybrid blockchain.
A hybrid blockchain.
You can basically hide the data and just expose what you want, and your business logic can basically.
So they have their own protocol, or they just created an interchain, or what exactly is that?
It's a blockchain.
Yeah, it's its own blockchain.
Think of it as notarization on steroids. Well, stupid way to think of it, but it's a good simple shortcut.
But you do share that reaction with a lot of people.
Awesome. Well, first, let's give a big round of applause for our panelists. Just really quick announcements. Megan, when's the next Ethereum meetup?
It's August 14th, and we'll be talking about running your own node infrastructure.
Awesome. And then the next Hyperledger meetup is August 27th, Tuesday, and we'll have Paige Krager from IBM. Topic TBD, but we're working on that, so probably back here in this space. Also, I want to thank the Trufflesuite guys for hosting our water and snacks today, so thank you very much. Very appreciated. And would you guys like to talk a little bit about the conference coming up?
Love to.
Okay.
If you weren't aware, TruffleCon is our annual gathering of startup, enterprise, obviously developers from all walks of life, primarily Ethereum, but across other ecosystems as well. Microsoft is hosting us this year right on main campus. It's a 3-day affair, workshops, plenary sessions with some of the top thought leaders in blockchain. Jill Lubin will be speaking from Consensus, as well as just a fantastic panel. There are still tickets available. You can, I'll put some flyers out back or on the table in the back. You can, $99 for all 3 days. It's a deal. Yeah, I'd love to see you all there.
Thank you. Megan, anything else? Joshua?
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you guys so much. Just a reminder, once you leave, you cannot get back in, so please don't leave anything in here. And feel free to stay and network, and we'll be wrapping up around 6:15. So thank you.
Thank you.